So as you can see, the numbers are going up. Now, I mentioned this earlier, but just to restate it so we're clear, in the year 312, something changes, right? The year 312, something changes. Or I'm sorry, something's going to change in the year 313. But that's why they have the year 312 up here, because it indicates that change, which is going to lead to Christianity to explode in terms of numbers. And that change has to do with an emperor named Constantine, or rather I should say a man who wanted to be emperor. So there's something called the 3rd century crisis in Roman history. We don't talk about it because this isn't a class on Roman history only. But basically there was a problem in Rome. The Roman Empire was divided and was at civil war again. And one of the contenders to become the new emperor was a man named Constantine. Constantine's father was not a Christian, but his mother was. I do think his father eventually did accept Christianity on his deathbed, but he's an example of a non-Christian man marrying a Christian woman. And so from his mother, Constantine knew something about Christianity. Now, Constantine was getting ready to go into a major battle, and before that battle, which would determine whether or not he would become emperor, basically, he had a vision in which he saw imposed on the sun a Christian symbol and the words, "In this sign you shall conquer." And he had the symbol painted on his soldiers' shields and went off and fought and won the battle. Right? So he's going to win in the battle. So he thought, oh my gosh, the Christian God is the real deal. So he will tolerate Christianity. In the year 313, he will issue an edict saying that you can't persecute Christians for being Christian. And he will give lots of money to the Christian church and will actually accept baptism on his deathbed. In this time period, it was common often for people to get baptized before when they were getting ready to die, because they especially someone like Constantine, who was a ruler, because they were probably committing lots of sins as rulers. So they wanted to postpone baptism. Now, there's a lot of different reasons why Constantine would convert, and I do think the guy was sincere. He had a religious experience. His victory in battle seemed to confirm the veracity of that experience, so that seems, makes sense. But he also had a political purpose, and you could have both, right? He hoped that Christianity could unify the empire, right? We'll have one God, one church, one empire. That will keep the empire together, right? That's his idea. And of course, here's the thing. This leads to a massive increase in conversion. Risk goes way down. It's not risky anymore to be a Christian. You're not going to be killed for simply being Christian. And also the reward goes up, because now it's clear that Christianity is favored by the emperor. So you maybe don't care about religion. You're maybe indifferent to the whole subject, but you know that the emperor is a Christian and you want to get promoted. So maybe it's a good idea just to go ahead and become a Christian too. And that's one reason why we have such explosive growth. Now, I do want to point out, this is a Greek version of what Constantine saw. The Latin, there's the cross up there in his vision. And there you can see this is an Toitia Nika. Nika, you may have heard of Nike shoes. Nike is the Greek goddess of victory. Nika means victory, to win. In Latin, it would have been in hoc signo vinces. Either case, it means in this sign you will be victorious. And so now we're on the road to having a Christian empire. Right? After Constantine, we're on the road to having a Christian empire. Now, what does it mean to have a Christian empire? And what does this mean for Christianity? Well, like I said, there's an increase in conversion. That's a big thing that happens. But also, now that Christians aren't being persecuted and can operate openly, they're able to develop their theology more deeply. So, for example, this is when you get Christians really trying to work out what the Trinity means, right? Okay, Jesus is God, but he's also a human. The Holy Spirit is God. God the Father is God, and yet we don't have three gods. We have one God. How does that work theologically? And so now Christians, because they're not being persecuted, they can deal with that. And as they do this, and this is very important, I think, Christianity, because it had been persecuted for 300 years, they had to kind of figure out how to work within the Roman Empire. which emphasized the use of reason and Greek philosophy. So in Christianity, as they try and work out their theology, they're using reason. Right? Theology, in a sense, is trying to take like biblical text, scripture, and trying to figure out how they go together. And what happens when one text seems to contradict another text? Well, we need to think more deeply about what that might mean. And they're really drawing on the Greek philosophical heritage to do this. And if you look at the Bible, for example, in the Gospel of John, they talk about the Logos. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and the Word dwelt among us. That term logos, translated as word, is from Greek philosophy. So we've got this inheritance that's become a part of Christian DNA. And that brings up a very important Christian thinker who's one of these theologians who's trying to figure out now that we're not being persecuted, what should we as Christians believe? And Augustine's an interesting guy. He's again one of these people, pagan father, Christian mother, and in his case, I think I maybe was wrong. It wasn't Constantine's father who converted on his late. It was Augustine's father. But Augustine, for much of his life, his father was not a Christian. His mother was a Christian, though. And Augustine had kind of a wild life. He did a lot of crazy things when he was young, and he wrote a whole book talking about them. And one thing that really bothered him, this kind of question, was why do people commit evil acts? And he uses this example in his Confessions, where he talks about all the bad things he did. And he talked about when he was a kid, he would steal pears. And you may ask yourself, pears of what? Shoes? Pants? No, I mean literally pears. Like he stole fruit from a fruit tree. And you may say, well, what's the big deal? I mean, he was a kid. It was just fruit. Who cares? Well, here's Augustine's reason for caring. He said, I didn't steal the fruit because I was hungry. It's not like I needed the food. I stole the fruit because it was fun, because I enjoyed it. I liked taking someone else's property. I thought it was fun to hurt someone else. And that really bothered him. Right? And I think that really should bother us. Why do we hurt people for no really good reason? Not that we should hurt people if we have a good reason, but why are people sometimes casually cruel? And his developed this idea called original sin, where he argued that human nature is deeply wounded. God made us good, but there's something wrong with us. God's original creation was good, but something wounded our human nature. So instead of being good like we were created, we do bad things. What was it? Well, it was caused by the disobedience of Adam and Eve when they ate that apple. And that disobedience to God cut them off from God and hurt them. It wounded their human nature, which they passed on to their descendants. And because of that rupture between us and God, that's why Jesus died for us, was to repair that. And only that unmerited grace from the cross, from Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, that's what saves us. Now, doesn't that sound a lot like what a preacher might say? Well, that's what Augustine is teaching, right? And that you can kind of see his influence there. Now, Augustine is not only important for how Christians understand their faith today, he also is important for other reasons as well, to both the broader Roman Empire and to how we think about war. So here's the problem now. The empire is now Christian. So here's this question, can Christians fight? Right? Is it okay for Christians to engage in battle? After all, didn't Jesus say he who lives by the sword dies by the sword? And when Jesus was arrested, he didn't allow him, he told his disciples not to fight? So this is a difficult question, especially now that the empire is Christian. But Augustine argued that, while it might be right for me to allow myself to suffer, out of love of neighbor, I need to fight to defend my neighbor. Now, it's a little bit more complex than that, but he argued that love of neighbor forces us to defend our neighbor, which would justify going to war. But Augustine also developed what is called just war theory. Now, I want to point out, when I say just war, I don't mean only war. I mean right war, justice war, a war that is just. And he developed what came to be a Christian understanding of when you could fight war. Now, it's important to understand, in the ancient world, a lot of times you didn't need a reason. to fight a war. It's just you wanted to conquer something, you did it. The Romans cared, though, a lot, right? You may remember with Numenus teachings that it was very important that there were lots of rules about going to war, and Romans insisted on having a good reason for going to war. And so Augustine's trying to build on that tradition and Christianize it. And so what Augustine argues is, first of all, a proper authority must declare a war, like a government. I can't declare war. Augustine can't declare war. He's a bishop. He's a church leader. He's not the state. He can't declare war. Only a government, like the Roman Empire, can declare war. It has to be for just reasons. You can't just declare war because someone did something to you. They have to have hurt you. So, for example, if someone invades your territory or invades an ally's territory, that would be a just reason to go to war, because after all, you should help your ally out of love of neighbor. Moreover, Augustine, and this is what I think is really fascinating, he was concerned about intentions. It's not enough just to do something that's good. God knows your heart. So you also have good intentions. So you might say, yeah, we're protecting our ally, when secretly in your heart you're like, yes, I can go to war and get glory and conquer my enemies. That's awesome. I'm going to get totally famous. And Augustine said, no. You also have to have good intentions. You have to intend peace. The only reason to legitimately go to war, or the only legitimate intention to go to war, is to bring peace. And I just want to stress, you can see here, in a sense, the ghost of Plato, who was obsessed with justice. So I have to stress, in Christianity, there is this marriage between classical philosophy and Christian faith. It's this kind of combination between the Hebrew civilization and Greco-Roman civilization, especially this emphasis on the idea of reason, and in the case of Augustine, this idea of natural law, right? That there are laws that we should follow, that in a sense are ordained by God, and human law should follow God's law. And we can understand God's law through our reason. We can use the Bible, but also we can use biblical principles and our own reason to determine what natural law is. And human law should accord with natural law. So and Augustine is famous for saying an unjust law is no law at all. And I want to show you how ancient history shapes modern history. This is a quote, and I'm going to read it to you. And as I read it to you, I want you to try and guess who said it. You express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws. This is certainly a legitimate concern. Since we so diligently urge people to obey the Supreme Court's decision of 1954 outlawing segregation in the public schools, at first glance it may seem rather paradoxical for us consciously to break laws. One may well ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer lies in the fact that there are two types of laws, just and unjust. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. Who was it that wrote this? Martin Luther King in his famous Birmingham letter from the Birmingham jail, right? So King had a serious issue. He wanted people to obey laws that struck down desegregation, but his strategy of civil disobedience, in which people broke unjust laws, such as, there's a law that says you can't, the African Americans have to sit in the back of the bus, so someone's going to sit in the front, so African Americans will protest by sitting in the front and refusing to leave their seats, right? Well, how can you justify obeying one law, not the other, right? Martin Luther King, as he says here, people are saying, why is it that you say that we have to follow laws that desegregate public schools when you're breaking laws that say, African Americans have to ride in the back of the bus? And his argument is, but there's a higher law. There is a natural law. And if a law is not in accord with that natural law, we don't have to obey it. In fact, we maybe should break it in order to get the law changed. Now, I want to stress here, you don't want to take this out of context, right? You don't want to say, okay, this is great, so I can break any law I want and go out and kill and steal, whatever. No, you can't break laws that are against the natural law, right? So it would only be an unjust law that you can challenge, right? So, for example, like I say, laws that are segregationist laws would be an example of this. Laws that say you can't steal or destroy people's property, those are not unjust laws, right? King and Augustine would have both said, no, no, you can't go around killing people and destroying property. But what's key here, right? A central civil rights leader, when he was trying to figure out how to deal with the difficulties African Americans were facing and trying to build a more just society and sitting in jail, trying to figure out how to do that when people were criticizing him, he quoted a 4th and 5th century ancient Roman Christian thinker. And I think that's one thing that makes this class so important, because people in the past still have a lot to say to us today in our efforts to make a more just and better society.